All right, everyone else seems to be able to hear you perfectly. All right. You may introduce yourself, Dr. Jones.
I'm E. Michael Jones, editor of Culture Wars magazine, author of a number of books. Can everyone hear me?
We sure can.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yes, sir.
Positive responses so far. Yeah, everyone seems to hear you.
You're the only person I can hear.
We'll go on to ask questions later on. Other people may be able to ask their questions through mic if they so choose. I'll be reading some of these questions and then I'll ask them if they want to hear. So I suppose we can just cut right into it. Now, the first question comes from Kali Yuga. And his question is, what is the difference between Semitism and Zionism, if there are any? If there is any difference at all? Also, the answer is according to you or to Jews, or is it a historic notion? Also, who are Semites historically, and do Muslim groups like Palestinians fall under the Semite group or not? VC. Kali Yuga, I will unmute you if you're still here, and you may discuss this with Dr. Jones. All right, you're muted now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Kali Yuga, you there?
Kali Yuga is not in the
Yeah, I've
chat.
unmuted you, Kali.
Okay, great. Now I'm here, yes. Hello, yes.
I can't seem to hear your voice, Kali.
Do you sure? Are
I
you
can answer
here?
the question if you want me to.
Yes, yes. You sure you cannot hear me? I hear everything fine. Hello?
I hear Kali.
We can hear Kali, I can't seem to hear him. It's probably because I'm going through Skype, so
Can be the
my
the
other
reason, yes.
apps have been muted.
We'll just ask the questions ourselves, Raz.
Yeah,
have
I
you read
suppose you should just
Siege by
answer the
James
question now,
Mason?
Dr. Jones.
Have you read Siege by James Mason?
If you want me to repeat
Okay,
it.
first the question is a question between Zionism and Semitism. Zionism is an ideology that Jews have subscribed to. It's one example of their messianic politics. It's a mobilization of the Jewish people according to a particular idea. The opposite ideology is communism. We have to make a distinction between these ideologies and the Jewish people themselves. The Jewish people believe certain things at certain times. During the 19th century up to the middle of the 20th century, most Jews were socialists or communists. After 67, most Jews became Zionists, although there are still a significant number who were left-wing socialist communists.
And the second part of this question was that would you consider Palestinians to be under the category of Semites and other Muslim groups?
Palestinians are Semites. Jews are not Semites. From a racial point of view, the Ashkenazi Jews are a Turkic people. They came from the northern shore of the Black Sea, converted to Judaism about 8 centuries after Christ. There is no racial continuity between the Ashkenazi Jews and Moses. legitimate people. They're tricky people.
Okay, then. Next question comes from Mosin, and his question seems to be a more theological question. How do you justify the filioque clause? I suppose this is to deal with the Trinity.
God, the Holy Spirit proceeded from God the Father and God the Son. That's what the filioque clause is about. The Orthodox say that the Holy Spirit only proceeded from God the Father. This is a complicated question. If you're asking if this divides Orthodox Christians from Catholic Christians, the answer is no. The division is political, and it's always been political.
Okay. Next question comes from a user by the name of Blooper. His question is, will you denounce current Catholic hierarchy as contrary to Christian dogma? No?
No.
I suppose a follow-up to this would be, what are your opinions on the sedevacantist movement?
It is a movement that has no real basis in reality. It's largely subscribed to by people who don't understand the complexities of the current situation. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. The whole issue of the Jews became taboo around 1965 with the ending of the Second Vatican Council, when the church passed Nostra Aetate, which is a valid document, but then they decided they're going to have Catholic-Jewish dialogue, which has been a total failure. So the project of Catholic-Jewish dialogue failed because it is inconsistent with the statements on the Jews that are in the seminal documents of the Catholic faith, namely the Gospel and the epistles and so on and so forth. St. Paul said the Jews are the people that killed Christ, and they are enemies of the entire human race. The church is simply not preaching the gospel at the moment, but it will have to get back to that because that is the seminal teaching of the Catholic Church.
Okay. Next question comes from a user by the name of Moon. Her question is, can you talk about the quote-unquote new left and their agenda to push homosexuality and forcing children to participate in gay pride parades? Do you believe in this degeneracy?
No, the creator, the philosophical creator of the new left was Michel Foucault. Up till Michel Foucault, the left was involved in economic issues. Michel Foucault was a homosexual, and basically he created what he calls his pact with the devil. This is an actual event that took place in Death Valley during 1975 when he went there with the other homosexuals, took some LSD, and came up with a new understanding, a new modus operandi. And the modus operandi is basically, of the new left, is basically, you give us unlimited sexual liberation, and we'll criticize your economic system. That is a system that exists to this day.
Okay, then. And this is a second question from Kali Yuga, and it's, can we say that Christian individualistic values were hidden in the protective tribal shell of religion so that the values survive over long periods of time and be propagated into the masses safely, so to avoid other religions picking out people who attain individualistic values one by one? Nowadays, fall of Christianity would allow for religions to affect individual people without a protective tribal shell. Thus, we observe Westerners writing to Islam or Buddhism, for example.
Christianity never had a protective tribal shell. There were Christians who longed for the protective tribal shell of Judaism. But that became obsolete at the time of the crucifixion. But that doesn't mean that Christians didn't want it. We call these people Judaizers. One of the popes referred to Christians returning to the vomit of Judaism. The Donatist heretics in North Africa were an example of Judaizers. The church has always condemned these people as heretics. It doesn't change the fact that people would like a tribal religion. But that's not what Christianity is. As soon as St. Paul sailed across the Aegean to Greece, Christianity stopped being tribal and it became a global religion, at least in potential. Because now people like Paul were going to preach the gospel to the entire world and not just to the Jewish synagogues.
So it became more of a global religion then.
It became a global religion as soon as St. John wrote his gospel in Greek.
Now, this is another question from a user by the name of 1 Thessalonians 2:14-60, saying, how do you feel about the economic ideology of distributism as explained by G.K. Chesterton?
It's not adequate. It's not wrong, although in some places Belloc does make serious economic mistakes. But basically, it's not an adequate alternative to capitalism. The basis for my book, Barren Metal, is Heinrich Pesch and the whole German Catholic economic tradition, which was much more sophisticated and explains and poses a real alternative to global capitalism.
Okay. This is a question that someone who could not make it here, I have it saved. The username is Golden Eagle, and his question is, what are your views on race realists, specifically Richard Spencer of the National Policy Institute and Jared Taylor of American Renaissance? They are famous, or rather infamous, most notably for their ideas of the ethno-state, and that human beings are fundamentally different on the biological and genetic level. Are their views compatible with your own general philosophy/ideology? Could you explain why or why not?
No, they are not compatible. If you're interested in my thoughts on this, I have a book on Kindle or Amazon called Ethnos Needs Logos. And it's basically the story of me spending a week in Guadalajara, Mexico, trying to convince David Duke to become a Catholic. The long and short of it is that the fundamental characteristic of a human being is logos, or rationality, or speech, and it's not biology. Biology may determine the size of your nose, but it does not determine your ideas. Okay, that's the realm of logos. To be specific here, both Richard Spencer and Jared Taylor admire Jews, especially Richard Spencer. He wants white people to become Jews, act like Jews. This is the antithesis of everything that I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that Christianity is superior to Judaism, which is an obsolete religion. It's over. The Jewish religion ended when Jesus Christ died on the cross. Okay? We don't need more people admiring Jews like Richard Spencer. And the other point I'm trying to make here is, as soon as you start saying that Jews are white, they disappear. They become invisible, and then you can't complain about what they're doing because they don't exist as a group. This is the antithesis of everything that I'm trying to do.
All right. Another question comes from a user by the name of Alert Lord. His question is, with the current situation in the West, that is to say, countries of European descent have seemingly lost its spirituality and have just replaced it with meaningless hedonism, which has only furthered our decline by giving rise to low birth rates, sexual liberation, and of course mass immigration. Do you think that we, as in I assume Europeans, will simply fade away, or what kind of changes do you predict we will see?
The answer is yes. If you don't have children, you will fade away. You will disappear. It's that simple. The flip side of the immigration crisis is the collapse of the European birth rate. This is a result of the sexual revolution. The antidote to this is a return to sexual morality. The birth rate will follow automatically from a return to sexual morality, because the two major sins against sexual morality are contraception and abortion, which have been imposed on conquered peoples to limit their birth rate and therefore limit their demographic power. So the key to a healthy birth rate is the return to sexual morality. I gave a speech at a mosque in Tehran, and at the end, it was on sexual liberation and political control. At the end of the speech, I asked the men, how many men are married? And then I asked the married men, how many children do you have? I went down the line. There were about 20 men who raised their hand. Not one man had one child. So I said to the Iranians, you have 20 years to solve this problem. If you don't, you will cease to exist as a people after 2,500 years. I'm saying the exact same thing to Europe.
Another question by the user, Spitfirex. His question is, what do you think will happen once Christianity and all its principles will be uprooted from this society? Will we survive the pure nihilism that will ensue? Is there any way to avoid this and save this dying society/civilization?
Christianity will never be uprooted. I mean, now I'm talking about an article of faith. Jesus Christ said, you are Peter, that's the first pope, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So this is a guarantee. This is a theological guarantee that the church will never disappear from the face of the earth. It is going through a crisis right now. There's absolutely no question. The cause of this crisis is the failure of the church to understand the nature of psychological warfare. Okay, the church has been subjected to two forms of this type of psychological warfare in the United States, neither of which it understands. Form number one is social engineering, in particular the destruction of Catholic parishes and neighborhoods. I cover this in my book, The Slaughter of Cities, Urban Renewal as Ethnic Cleansing. The other form of psychological warfare was the sexual revolution. I cover this in Libido Dominandi, Sexual Liberation and Political Control. As soon as the church understands the nature of the warfare that has been waged against it, I think the church will recover and start to regain territory.
So it seems to be more of like a recognition of what we're actually dealing with. That seems to be the main problem of the church.
I think that's exactly the problem. There is a fiction now among Catholics that Jews are our friends. This has crippled the Catholic Church completely in dealing with the culture wars. The Jews are the enemies of the entire human race. That means they are the enemies of the Catholics. The Catholics are told to love their enemies, and that's true. So we have to express this love by exposing these people to the truth. That means standing up and to the Jew taboo and holding Jews accountable for all of the bad things they have done recently, from Bolshevism all the way up to gay marriage. There's no point in pretending that the people who were involved in this are the friends of humanity or friends of the Catholic Church or friends of anybody. This is all forms of psychological, well, Bolshevism was more than psychological warfare, but certainly that.
Okay. I believe Kathleen Tanner, username Reasonable Christian, wants to speak to you. I'm sure that you can hear other people in the voice chat, correct?
All I can hear is your voice. I cannot hear anyone else.
Kathleen, can you try speaking?
Yeah, I can try speaking, if it's possible to hear me. I don't know if they can hear
Can
me
you
through
hear
your
her?
mic or not.
I can't hear her, sorry.
No, sorry.
Ah,
Let's continue. Another question from Dust to Phoenix. Her question is, why is the push for pedophilia in the left so strong in recent years?
Pedophilia is, first of all, if you're talking about the crisis in the Catholic Church, pedophilia is misdirection. The problem is homosexuality. And the question, so 90% of all the so-called pedophile cases, sexual abuse cases, all took place between the mid-60s and the mid-80s. 99% of all of those cases involve homosexuality. So the real issue is homosexuality and the Catholic Church. And then the question is homosexuality wrong? If it's wrong, then I can understand why you're condemning Cardinal McCarrick, but then you have to condemn every other homosexual who acts this way. If it's not wrong, then why are you condemning only priests? That's the issue, if I understood the question properly.
Another question by Mohsin is nationalism compatible with Catholicism?
Yes, absolutely. The map of Europe before the 20th century, even today, is a map of nation states. The church had no problem coordinating the efforts of various language groups in Europe. Obviously, there were struggles involved, but the problems began with the Reformation, when the church became a national church. A national church is not going to be capable of solving international problems. Only the Catholic Church can mediate between competing national groups. But nationalism is, yes, completely compatible with Catholicism.
This is a question by the user Spitfire X again. His question is, when did you first begin to notice Jews and their social activism, particularly in undermining the Catholic Church?
2003, when the neocons took over America's foreign policy and got us involved in war in Iraq. It was around that time.
And I hear that, was it Rabbi Dresner who gave you the inspiration to write about works like Jewish
Rabbi Dresner contacted me, and I read his book. I reviewed his book in Culture Wars. He was a big fan of Culture Wars. He told every Catholic he knew to subscribe to it. That got me thinking about Jews. Daniel Jonah Goldhagen's attack on Pius XII, that also took place around that time. But it was Rabbi Dresner who started talking in his book about all the Jews who were involved in pornography. and how this was a scandal to decent Jewish people. And that led me to basically the first article I did via, Luke Ford, going on Luke Ford's website, Luke Ford talking about all the Jews involved in pornography. And my article on Jews and pornography was the first article that was the beginning of what ended up as the book, The Jewish Revolutionary Period.
And this question comes from a user by the name of Dart Swanson. His question is, why do you think that Jews believe it is in their best interest to subvert the morals of Christians?
Because Jews are always a minority, wherever they are. And they always fear majority rule. And so they feel more secure when they can weaken the majority. And the simplest way to weaken a majority is through moral subversion. Because as Augustine said, a man has as many masters as he has vices. The best example I can give from the Bible is Samson and Delilah. When Samson became involved with Delilah, he lost his power. That's a typically Hebrew type of metaphor for what happens to you, what lust does to you. Aquinas said lust darkens the mind. The Hebrew symbol was basically Delilah putting out Samson's eyes. So this is why Jews are involved in moral subversion.
And this is a question by OAS. His question is it true that Judaism was created in 200 AD Babylon?
Yes, if you're talking about the Talmud, yes. Judaism is a religion that is younger than Christianity. And the heart of the Jewish religion is the Talmud. And the Talmud was basically written over a period of, depending on which one you're talking about, 300 to 600 years after Jesus Christ ascended into heaven. So, yes, it is a newer religion, and it was created after Christ. It is not the religion of Moses. That religion is impossible to fulfill unless you have a temple, a priesthood, and a sacrifice. And those possibilities were completely destroyed in 70 AD when the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. So at that point, the Jews met at a synagogue and not at the temple, and they needed a new religion to conform to the synagogue, and Talmudic Judaism is what they created.
All right, this is another theological question by the user named Wicked. His question is, if good works are necessary for and contribute to an individual's salvation, why did Jesus need to pay for our sins with death, since we could have simply made the payment ourselves with enough good works?
No, that's not true. Good works are the response to Jesus Christ's opening of the gates of heaven by his death. You don't earn your way to heaven. God saves you. But in order to complete the transaction, you have to act in a certain way, and that's good works, acts of charity.
Okay, and this is a question by Subs. His question is, do you think it is worth the effort to attempt to justify Christian morality using secular reasoning that is popular in the West? Or is it more effective to spread the theology of Christianity?
That deals with the book that I'm writing right now. I'm writing a history of Logos, and it's called The History of Logos and the Logos of History. First of all, there is no such thing as Christian morality. There is simply morality. Morality is a form of Logos. It is practical reason. Christianity defends Logos. Christianity does not create Logos. The Logos of morality is written on your heart. What Christianity does is allow you to act on that in an effective way through grace, which you receive from the sacraments. So it's Christianity. I mean, I'm going to simplify here, but if you're an athlete, Christianity is the food that you eat, so that you can run the marathon and finish. It's not the race, it's the food you eat. That's probably I'm struggling here with an analogy. All I'm saying here is that the logos of practical reason has existed ever since the first human being existed, okay? Because it's part of what it means to be a human being, which is a rational creature. This is the way you approach the good, by acting in a certain way. Certain actions are good, certain actions are bad. Christianity came along and allowed you to act on that in a way that would be effective. Because up to that point, man was simply thwarted by his own passions and could not achieve a successful life.
Fair enough. This is a question from Blink If You're Holy. His question is, what are your views on Hitler, National Socialism, the Third Reich, and its compatibility with Catholicism?
The Third Reich was a pagan alternative to Christianity. Hitler was determined to unify the German people. The major obstacle to that unification was the Reformation, which had divided Germany into two groups of people, Protestant and Catholic. Hitler looked at this, he thought about it, he tried to do what he could do, and he failed. He simply could not resolve the Reformation. And so what he had to do was go behind the Reformation and pretend that Christianity never happened. And with the help of Wagnerian operas, he went back to German mythology. And that, along with the racial theories of people like Madison Grant, gave him the ideological underpinnings of National Socialism. It is all mumbo jumbo. I'm sorry, it doesn't work, but that's what the only thing that Hitler could come up with to solve the problem of how to unify Germany divided along confessional lines.
All right, this is quite a long one, going back to theology. This is from Kathleen Tanner. The Bible is not inerrant. It is infallible in its purpose to inform the penitent about Christ. The Bible is also not the final authority of the God on earth. We can know infallibility certain aspects of God's divine will. One of these being the that love is necessary, is a necessary constitutive element of God's nature. Marriage is simply a ceremony that is reflective of the union that has already been ordained by God in heaven. Since the Bible must be exegete within the context of proper dispensationalism, how is it possible that you can make claims against the divine will of God that has ordained same-gendered people or same-sex people to fall in love? You are seemingly left with only two options. Either God has failed to properly communicate his message to the penitent, that is to say, God is fallible or God is lying. The third option of misrepresentation is not a logical option, as God cannot fail in communication in his message. Part 2, Met Kallistos Vare, I'm not sure, Archbishop of the Eastern Orthodox Church, has spoken greatly on the fact that the approach of the church to the issue of the LGBT condition of secret sin, because the church will treat promiscuous sinners differently than monogamous sinners. The church, in its attempt to force celibate vocation on an unwilling community, it is conditionally creating a greater body of sin. This paradox is something that must be addressed. Surely you, Michael, are not in favor of promiscuity.
No, I'm not in favor of promiscuity. You're absolutely right. If you're saying that celibacy is the cause of homosexuality in the church or promiscuity, I disagree with that. The cause of the sexual crisis in the church is the sexual revolution. It happened at a particular period in time with a particular cause. There was a priest by the name of Eugene Kennedy who did a survey of the priests according to the principles of Erik Erikson during the 1970s. And the principle of Erik Erikson said that unless you had sexual intercourse, you were not a mature person. this basically gave the priests permission to act out their sexual impulses, and it had a catastrophic effect on the Catholic Church. That is the cause of promiscuity. That is the cause of the sexual crisis in the clergy. It has nothing to do with celibacy.
All right, and that was part two. The first part was, if I could sum it up, was that since love is a necessary constitutive element of God's nature, and marriage is simply a ceremony that is reflective of the union that has already been ordained by God, how is it possible that you can make claims against the divine will of God that has ordained the same sex or same gender people to fall in love?
You're saying that same-sex people can fall in love. That, I suppose that's true. Okay, but they have a distorted appetite. In other words, something went wrong here, and the object of their love cannot be fulfilled. Okay, so the union the sexual union that you perceive as good does not conform to the intention of behind human sexuality. Okay, you've got the homosexual has a distorted vision of the sexual object. It's a misplaced vision of the sexual object that cannot conform to the intention of sexuality, and so therefore it's morally wrong, and you cannot act on it from this position. The church is also full of sinners who act on things that they shouldn't act on. And when the culture starts promoting this type of behavior as normal, more and more Catholics are going to start acting on it. And that is what causes the problem here.
This question is from a user by the name of Chadleyan King. His question is, what do you think of the Chaldeans, or as he says, the Babylonians?
Babylon was an empire that came and rose according to God's plan.
Okay. It's Chaldeans. Sorry, I mispronounced it.
The Chaldeans?
Yeah, the Chaldeans or Babylonians.
I'm not sure what you're referring to. Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldees. There's a group of Christians called Chaldean Christians. I'm not sure what the question's referring to.
Unless Chaldean King could clarify. But we'll get back to that. Another question by OAS is opinions on Freemasonry.
There's a whole chapter on Freemasonry in my book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. The long and short of it is basically the Whig oligarchs took over the Masonic lodges at the beginning of the 18th century, 1721, when they formed the Grand Lodge in London. And that they weaponized them, and that became the instrument that eventually brought down the Bourbon monarchy in France.
Through more so methods by Weishaupt's Illuminism, essentially, that the Freemasons took up.
Adam Weishaupt created the Illuminati as an alternative to the Masonic lodges.
Okay, this question is from Wicked again. His question is, the Bible speaks of Christ as the intercessor between God and man, restoring the relationship since God and man were estranged through sin. If Jesus is our intercessor, why do Catholics attempt to utilize particularly holy dead people, quote unquote saints, as intercessors between man and Christ? Moreover, where do Catholics get the idea that one can pray to saints in the same manner that one prays to God? And someone, a dead Christian, will be able to receive this message much like God would.
Yeah, there are two different words for worship, the dulia and latria, and there are two different ways of appealing to God. So first of all, to set the record straight, no saint could exist if Jesus Christ hadn't become man and suffered and died on the cross. That opened the gates of heaven once again. So no saint could exist unless that had happened. And that is why Jesus Christ is the true mediator between God and man, and the only mediator. By only meaning that no other person could have come to that role without Jesus Christ having first opened that door. Now, once that happens, people have lived successful lives, which means they have died and gone to heaven, and they exist in some type of union with God. And because these people led particular lives, sometimes their lives resonate with ours, and we see them as types of friends, and we use them as a way of approaching Jesus Christ, who is the way. But the principle is that Jesus Christ is the way you can approach a basically unapproachable God, because the God before Jesus Christ, God the Father, is just pure being. And this was the problem that the Greeks had, that Aristotle had with the unmoved mover. Okay, you need some type of link between a God who is pure form, living off in eternity, and a world that is in motion and transient. And that role was first fulfilled by Jesus Christ. And everything else is kind of icing on the cake after that.
Okay, this question again comes from Swanson. He asks, do you think the Protestant Reformation had any legitimacy from an unbiased viewpoint?
No. The Reformation was a looting operation. That's all it was. In England, it was absolutely nothing but that. There was no theological justification whatsoever for the Reformation in England. It was simply theft of church property by aristocrats, pure and simple. That's all it was. So it was a looting operation. In every Protestant country, it was a looting operation, but in Germany, there was no Germany, but the German principalities at that time had Luther. And Luther came up with some type of theological justification that enabled the aristocrats to steal the property. Without the aristocrats and their penchant for theft, there would have been no Martin Luther. He would have been simply, it would have been, as Pope Leo X said, it would have simply been a quarrel among monks. And that's all it would have happened. But because the princes got behind it, because the princes got behind Luther, it became the theft of church property, and it became the creation of a new type of state in Europe, and that division has persisted to this day.
Okay, this one's from Lando Autishan. He asks, how do you tell an Orthodox Christian about the true nature of the Jews, given the polarization that Judaism places on the Christian mind?
The polarization that faces what?
He says the polarization that Judaism places on the Christian's mind.
Well, you have to break the Jew taboo. You have to first establish what a Jew is, which I did in my book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. A Jew is someone who rejects Logos. Once you reject Logos, you become a revolutionary, because Logos is also the social order of the universe. And then once you become a revolutionary, you try and overthrow the social order. That's what a Jew is. That's what you have to explain to people. It's not a racial issue. We're not talking about anti-Semitism in the classic sense of the word, which means that the Jew is determined by his biological makeup. We're talking about the Jew rejecting Logos, rejecting reason, and as a result, causing all kinds of mischief. And we can't give the Jews a pass on this. We can't simply just say to them, oh, it's because you're a Jew, so therefore you can't help yourself. No. The Jew has to behave in a moral fashion just like everyone else. No exceptions here. And we have to hold the Jew responsible when he does not act in a moral fashion, whether it's promoting, whether it's gunning down Palestinians, shooting women and children in the back, having Israeli snipers do this when they try and protest the fact that their land was stolen from them, or gay marriage, or Bolshevism, or any of these things. We have to be able to speak freely about this issue.
This one's from the Great Mew. He or she asks, if I'm made in God's perfect image, why do I have mental health issues? Why would God create me with impurities?
The answer to this is called original sin. Okay, this was the sin of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve had no natural inclination to sin. Okay, they were perfectly rational creatures, and yet they sinned. And that sin, as Augustine said, was so horrendous because they had no excuse that it's been visited on the entire human race. You inherit it from your parents, and your parents inherited from their parents all the way back to Adam and Eve. Okay, what you inherit is a genetic weakness. You inherit a weakness, an inability to control your passions. Okay, so you can run into trouble if you don't control your passions properly, because your passions become a slave master, and you become their slave. You become a slave of passion, as Shakespeare would say. And if you do, you will ruin your life. And if you ruin your life and you have children, chances are you will ruin your children's lives too, in some way or other, for which they are not morally culpable. And this is usually some type of mental illness. Okay, this is the sad consequence of sexual sin in one generation leads to psychological problems in the next generation. It's all because of original sin, because of this weakness visiting itself on generation after generation. This is a problem that people have, and Jesus Christ can solve any problem. That doesn't mean you're not going to have to struggle with problems in this life. We all have weaknesses. We have all succumbed to these weaknesses in one form or another. That's why we're all sinners. But the answer to this is the grace of God. There's no other answer.
This is another question by Kathleen Turner. Kathleen Turner asks, the Chalcedonian Creed views part of the hypostatic union as fallible. What are your opinions on this?
Hypostatic union. First of all, I'm not familiar with this Chalcedonian Creed. Okay, if you're saying a hypostatic union, is that the union of the Trinity is what you're referring to as fallible? No, that's impossible. Each member of the Trinity is God, and God is not capable of error. The Trinity is basically God in three aspects: being, knowing, and loving. God the Father is being, as he said to Moses. God the Logos is knowing, that is Jesus Christ. And God the Holy Spirit is acting through love in the world. So no, there's no possibility for error.
Another question is, how do you deal with the blatant eisegesis of the Catholic Church on Scripture? Apostolic succession being a great example of something antithetical to what the Bible says.
Why is that antithetical? I don't see any logic there. The Bible says to Peter, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. Jesus founded a church, and we get all of this, what we have, the patrimony comes from the apostles. Jesus Christ handed this patrimony on to the apostles, and they handed it down through the church by apostolic succession. So Jesus laid his hands on the apostles, and the apostles laid their hands on their successors, and all the way down to this day. That is not antithetical to the gospel. That is the fulfillment of the gospel.
And to go back to the previous question, the explanation was that the hypostatic union is the dual nature of the incarnate Christ.
God and true man. There's no possible. What is the problem? Is there one? Is true man is infallible? Is he infallible as God, but fallible as man? No, he's true God and true man. He's both.
This is another question from OAS. He asks, will the Eastern Orthodox ever recover after being destroyed by the Jewish Bolsheviks?
Yes, they have recovered. Russia is a Christian country now. It's Russian Orthodox Christianity. So they have recovered. Not to say there aren't problems with Russian Orthodoxy, but they have recovered from, I would say they have recovered from the Bolshevik attack.
And this is from Kathleen Tanner again. Kathleen Tanner says, Augustine of Hippo's views on original sin are heresy. Why do you reject the truth of the bill?
I'm sorry, you're breaking up.
Oh, sorry. Kathleen Tanner says that the Augustine of Hippo's views on original sin are heretical. Why do you reject the truth of Pelagius?
Pelagius is the heretic. Augustine is Orthodox. Augustine's views on original sin are the teaching of the Catholic Church. That is the Orthodox teaching. Pelagius was the heretic.
And now, another question here is from Spitfire. His question is, are you hopeful for the future?
Yes. Our hope is in the Lord. The history, the rule, the course of history is in the hands of God. He is the author of all of human history. It's all complete in his mind, and we are just living out his plans in a way that does not negate our free will. Our free will is part of that plan. So God cannot create a bad outcome, so therefore history must have a good outcome, and that's why I'm hopeful.
Okay, and this is from S5. So I'll just say his name is Matsudo. I can't pronounce your first name. Sorry. He essentially asks, "Are the fires in California the wrath of God?"
Every bad thing that happens with God's permission. All evil in this world has a purpose, and the purpose is to draw you closer to God. If there were no evil, we wouldn't need God. And God understands that, so he permits evil because he can draw a greater good out of that evil. This is the story of Joseph in the Bible. Joseph's brothers were going to kill him, but instead they sold him into slavery in Egypt. He then rose to a position of power under the Pharaoh, and then there was famine in Israel, and so they had to come to Egypt for grain, and they had to appeal to the very man they were going to kill. And Joseph said to his brothers, "The evil that you intended to do to me has been turned by God's power into good." I think that is the story of human history, including the wildfires in California.
Okay, another question I'm seeing here from Savaglaris is, do you think Arab Christians can successfully be integrated into Europe and America? I think this is a follow-up question to another one I was asked by Golden Eagle, which is quite a long one. He essentially states that according to the World Book Encyclopedia, it is estimated that Christians form 45% of Africa's population. In Europe, only 22% of Christians tend to go to church more than once a month. And many Christians in Europe hold increasingly favorable views towards homosexuality. Compared to Africans, where 34 of the 56 African nations have same-sex intercourse illegal, and only one nation has legally given same-sex couples the same family rights as heterosexual couples, do you think that the mass migration of sub-Saharan Africans, particularly from Christian African nations, could help solve the problem of the quote-unquote gay disco in Europe? Do you think the mass migration of Christian Africans and possibly Arabs into Europe could eventually benefit Europe?
Yes. I think that the biggest problem in Europe is unassimilatable Muslims. I think if people who are already Christians come to Europe, they will assimilate much faster than people who do not share Christianity. So yes, I think that's true. In terms of Africa, my experience with Africa is that homosexuality is virtually unknown in Africa. That is not the issue in Africa. They find it repugnant, completely alien. And if you're talking about East Africa, center of East African culture is the shrine of the Ugandan martyrs, which is basically a group of people who resisted the homosexual advances of the king and were martyred because of that. Now, this gives a certain anti-homosexual cast to all of East African society. So if you're an African Christian, in many ways, you're better off as a European than a French follower of Michel Foucault, because you're more open to Logos. And that is the whole point of being a human being. If you're open to Logos, you can talk to other people and you can come to some type of agreement about what is important. If you're in active rebellion against Logos in the way that Michel Foucault was and his followers are, you will lead your country to suicide over the long haul, which is precisely what happened to Michel Foucault. He screwed himself to death in the bathhouse of San Francisco because he had a death wish. This is the problem with Europe right now.
Okay. Next question is from Dart Swanson again. He asks, why do you think that people reject the legitimacy of the Crusades? There are many Semites that claim that they were unholy and that they were an unprovoked attack. What would be their reasoning?
Probably the Fourth Crusade, which basically was an attack on Byzantium, which was totally unjustified. And the whole idea had gotten out of control by that time. If you're talking about the rest of the other crusades, it was basically to liberate the Holy Land from the Muslim invaders and also to open up the Eastern Mediterranean to commerce and basically drive out the Arab pirates who had basically controlled that area of the sea. So I think that's the reason. I think there was a certain legitimacy to that idea. It was a response to Muslim aggression, a military response to Muslim aggression, and I think it was legitimate, but it got out of hand.
This is a question by the user Plu. He asks, do you think there's a real future for Christianity? Most young people in the West don't care, which is obvious by the moral decline, that is to say LGBT, while many young Muslims are becoming more infatuated with Islam, slowly taking over the West as the most dominant religion. What can we practically do to promote Christian values and prevent the growth of Islam and its extremism?
We have to understand the reasonableness of what we believe. And we have to explain this to people who don't see it. Okay, this is why I'm doing a book on Logos, because we have now reached the point where there is a universal conversation. What we're doing right now is an example of the universal conversation that is going on right now, largely because the American Empire spread the English language throughout the world, and also because we have the technological ability to engage in these conversations. Okay, I am saying that Christianity is in full compliance with Logos. That's the point of this book. Islam has always had problems with Logos. It has problems to this day. I have many Muslim friends, and I'm trying to help them by engaging in this dialogue, a dialogue about Logos.
Okay, and this question is from Blink If You're Holy. He says, have you ever studied the Vedic Hindu scriptures? And its symbolic resonance with Christianity? Is it possible that God has revealed himself to all peoples at different times, and through a long game of cultural telephone, essentially, the meanings and similarities have been lost in us in the modern era?
God did reveal himself to all peoples. This was the point of Wilhelm Schmidt's research. He was an anthropologist who spent a lot of time in the Pacific writing the Polynesian grammar and dictionary. He said, if you study anthropology, you realize that all of the so-called primitive tribes are monotheistic, and that polytheism is a sign of spiritual decadence. So there was an original, I think, monotheistic revelation to all men. And it disappeared. And one of the places where it disappeared is India. India is a country where they worship virtually everything. They worship monkeys. The Hanuman, the monkey god. There's a 3-story high monkey temple in I believe it's Delhi. I traveled all over India and saw they worship cobras. They worship this. They worship that. This is all a sign of a fall into polytheism, a fall into religious decadence because of cultural decadence. And the Indian friends I have talk about the caste system as a manifestation of this kind of decadence. And the caste system, some of the most intelligent discussion I've seen is it has some connection with usury. I'm trying to say everyone has had this revelation. The question is, why did it fail across the board? And the answer, I think, is original sin. Everywhere this original revelation of the oneness of God has disappeared into polytheism and futility and circular reasoning. That's why Christ had to come and set everything straight.
Okay. Next question comes from Moon again. She's essentially asking, how would Palestinians be able to secure their own state, or ethno-state as she calls it?
If I had to answer that question, they should give me the Nobel Prize immediately. This is how do you deal with people who hold Logos in contempt? I'm talking about the Israelis. How can you talk to people who hold Logos who don't feel that don't believe that they are held to normal canons of civilized behavior? I don't know how you do this. Usually, the only answer is force, and that is simply out of the question now. No one has the force to force the Israelis to do anything, including the United States government and the most powerful military on the face of the earth, and the most powerful man on the face of the earth, namely Donald Trump, who seems to be nothing but a pawn of rich Jewish backers. So I wish I had an answer. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah. Next question.
Okay, one more question. I have to get off and I got to do something now, but one more question.
Okay. This is from Living the Dream. He asks, do all branches of Christianity go to heaven?
No branch goes to heaven.
Or rather, do
People
the followers of all the branches of Christianity go to heaven? Like, do Orthodox, do Catholics, do Lutherans, Calvinists, etc.?
First of all, God sets the plan. He creates the plan. Your first step, the necessary but not sufficient condition for going to heaven, is baptism. Okay? All Christians are by definition baptized. So they fulfilled that part of the deal. The next question, but that's not enough. You have to persevere in virtue and good acts and charity in order to get into heaven. The question is, how do you do that? You can only do that with the help of grace. If you have certain Protestant sects, for example, that cut themselves off from grace by abolishing the sacraments that Jesus Christ founded through the church, it's going to be very difficult for those people to persevere in charity to the end. That's all I can say. I can't give you a list of people in heaven. I don't have it.
Okay, and that was the last question. Hopefully we can do this again and get more things like that.
I'm sorry. I apologize for my technological illiteracy. I simply could not get the microphone to work. I enjoyed this conversation. I hope we can do it in a better fashion sometime in the future. But thank you for allowing me to talk to you.
Thank you very much. It's our privilege to have you on as well, Dr. Jones. We will keep in touch and we will try to fix these issues so that we could have this on a later date. But yeah, it has been an honor talking to you, and I hope the rest of the chat appreciated it. And hopefully we can do this again. Thank you, Dr. Jones.
I hope so. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Bye-bye.
Bye.